The sky was dark with smoke as the small human escape pod fell through the atmosphere. Inside, a young explorer named Daniel held on tightly, praying that the ship would not break apart. The alarm screamed around him, and the heat of re-entry made the metal glow. Then, with a final shudder, the pod crashed into the surface of the strange planet. Daniel's head spun, his vision blurred, and his body ached from the impact. When he opened his eyes, he found himself lying in a muddy swamp. The ground was wet and soft, and the air smelled heavy with unknown plants. He struggled to move, his leg hurting, but then he froze. Right under him was a giant footprint pressed deep into the mud. It was so large that his entire body could fit inside it. The edges were fresh, filled with water, which meant something huge had been there only moments ago. Fear gripped his chest. He tried to convince himself that maybe it was just an animal, but before he could move, the light around him dimmed. A shadow fell over his body, stretching long across the swamp. Daniel slowly looked up, his heart pounding like a drum. Towering above him was a giantess. Her body was massive, at least 3 times taller than the tallest tree around. Her skin shimmered faintly under the alien sunlight, a pale silver glow. Her eyes burned like golden fire, and her mouth held sharp white teeth. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He thought she was a carnivore, a hunter, and that he had become her prey. The giantess leaned down, her enormous face filling his vision. She sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring as if studying his scent. The sound was deep, like wind rushing through a cave. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. He was frozen between terror and disbelief. With one slow movement, the giantess extended her hand. Each finger was as long as Daniel's arm, and her nails shone like blades. Her shadow swallowed him as she reached closer. Daniel tried to crawl back, but his injured leg made him stumble. Before he could escape, her hand closed around him, lifting him off the ground with ease. Daniel shouted and struggled, pounding his fists against her palm, but his tiny blows were nothing to her. The giantess lifted him higher, her glowing eyes never leaving him. She opened her mouth slightly, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Daniel's mind went cold. This was it, he thought. This was the moment he would be eaten, but then she stopped. The giantess did not bite. Instead, she tilted her head curiously, like a child watching a small creature. Her golden eyes narrowed, not with hunger, but with interest. She made a low humming sound, almost like a question. Daniel didn't understand, but the sound sent shivers through his body. She brought him closer to her face, studying him as if he were something rare. Daniel held his breath, still expecting the sharp teeth to close around him, but they never did. Her warm breath brushed against his skin, smelling faintly of sweet fruit, not blood. This small detail made him pause. Maybe she wasn't the kind of predator he imagined. The giantess blinked slowly, her long eyelashes moving like branches. Then, she carefully lowered him back to the muddy ground. Her hand released him, and he dropped into the giant footprint again. Daniel gasped, crawling backward, mud clinging to his hands. But she didn't chase him. She only stood still, towering like a living mountain, watching him with unreadable eyes. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. Every instinct told him to run, to hide, to survive. But another thought grew inside his mind. If she wanted to eat him, she could have done it already, so why didn't she? The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of water dripping from the trees. The giantess crouched lower, placing her hand gently on the ground, palm open. It was almost like an invitation. Daniel stared at it, trembling, unsure whether to trust her or not. The air was heavy with tension. Every second felt like a lifetime. Was she a monster, a hunter, a captor, or something else entirely? Daniel's heart raced as he realized the truth. This was no ordinary meeting. This was the beginning of something far stranger and far more dangerous than being eaten. Daniel's chest rose and fell quickly, his body still shaking from the shock. He could not believe he was still alive. The giantess had held him in her massive hand, her sharp teeth so close, yet she had not eaten him. Instead, she only stared at him as if he were something important, something she could not simply destroy. The swamp was quiet around them, no birds, no insects. Only the sound of Daniel's fast breathing. The giantess's golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, locked on him like a predator watching prey. Her stare was heavy, powerful, and it made him feel smaller than ever. Daniel tried to crawl back, but his injured leg burned with pain. He knew he could not outrun her, even if he wanted to. She shifted her weight, the ground trembling under her massive feet. Slowly, she crouched lower, her face once again close to his. Daniel held his breath, his hands shaking. Her lips parted slightly, and for a terrifying moment, he saw her long, sharp teeth. He thought again, this is it. This time she will bite, but the bite never came. Instead, the giantess tilted her head, her golden eyes narrowing with deep focus. It was as though she was trying to read him, trying to understand what he was. Her stare was not mindless hunger, it was thought. And thought was sometimes more dangerous than instinct. Daniel forced himself to speak, though his voice trembled. "Please, don't eat me," he whispered. Of course, she could not understand his words, but his tone, his fear, maybe his shaking body, something seemed to reach her. The giantess hummed again, a low, deep sound that echoed across the swamp. It was not a roar, not a growl, but a sound almost like speech. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Could she be trying to communicate? Her enormous hand moved again, and Daniel flinched. But she did not grab him this time. Instead, she pointed one giant finger at him, then at herself, then at him again. Daniel frowned in confusion. It almost felt like she was asking the question still. Her stare never softened. It was sharp, intense, unblinking, like a predator's eyes fixed on prey before the strike. Daniel's body tensed. Every instinct screamed at him to escape, but his mind whispered something else. If she wanted to eat him, why wait so long? The giantess leaned even closer, so close that Daniel could see faint scars across her silver skin. They looked old, like marks of battle. Her glowing eyes reflected his tiny body, as though he was a fragile insect in front of her. Daniel's throat was dry, his words caught. Her stare seemed endless, trapping him, drowning him in fear and mystery. Then suddenly, the giantess made a sharp sound. Her head turned toward the trees. Something else was moving in the swamp, Daniel heard. It too, the splashing of water, the crack of branches. The giantess rose to her full height. Standing tall like a living tower, her stare shifted away from him for the first time, but only for a moment. Then her eyes snapped back to him, as if warning him not to run. Daniel froze, his breath shallow. He realized something terrifying. Even while distracted, she never let him out of her sight. The stare was unbroken, the focus unshaken. To her, he was still prey, still fragile, still small, and yet she did not strike. She was protecting something, but was she protecting herself or him? The movement in the swamp grew louder. Daniel saw glowing shapes between the trees, smaller but fast, strange creatures, low to the ground, their eyes gleaming red in the darkness. They hissed, their teeth flashing like knives. Predators, but not like her. Daniel's fear doubled. If they attacked, he was helpless. The giantess crouched again, her enormous hand sweeping Daniel up before he could react. This time she held him tighter, as though shielding him from what was coming. Her golden eyes locked on the creatures. Her stare no longer curious but deadly. Daniel could feel her muscles tense, the deep rumble of a growl rising in her chest. The swamp shook as the smaller predator stepped closer, surrounding her. Daniel's heart pounded. He was trapped in her grip, unable to escape. But in that moment, he realized something. The giantess's stare was no longer the stare of a predator looking at food. It was the stare of a guardian before battle. The stare of someone who would fight, not feed. The first creature lunged from the trees. Teeth bared, the giantess moved with shocking speed. swinging her free arm and striking it to the ground with a thunderous crash. Her golden eyes burned brighter, her teeth bared in fury. Daniel felt every movement, every vibration, trapped in her massive hand. The stare that once terrified him now gave him a different fear. What if she wasn't planning to eat him? What if she planned to keep him? The swamp grew quiet after the battle. The smaller predators had fled, their bodies broken by the strength of the giantess. She stood tall, breathing heavily, her golden eyes glowing with fire. Her hand still held Daniel tightly, though not enough to crush him. He could feel her pulse through her skin, deep and steady, like the beat of a giant drum. Daniel's heart was still racing. He could hardly believe what had happened. The giantess had fought for him, not against him. But the question burned inside him. Why, if she wasn't going to eat him, then what did she want? The giantess slowly lowered him back to the ground. He stumbled as his feet touched the mud, his injured leg shaking under him. Her eyes followed his every move. The same stare, sharp and endless, but now mixed with something else. Curiosity. Without a sound, she turned and began walking deeper into the swamp. Her steps shook the earth, leaving massive prints behind. She stopped, then looked back at him, her hand gesturing once. It was clear she wanted him to follow. Daniel hesitated, fear and pain holding him still. But when her golden eyes narrowed, he forced his legs to move, limping after her. They walked for a long time, the air growing heavier with mist. Finally, they reached a cave hidden between tall stone cliffs. The entrance glowed faintly with strange crystals, their light pulsing like a heartbeat. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with a sweet scent. Daniel's eyes widened as he saw piles of bones scattered across the floor. Large bones, small bones, some bleached white with age. The truth struck him hard. The giantess was indeed carnivore, and he had just stepped into her lair. His body froze, every nerve screaming danger. The giantess noticed his fear, but she did not stop. Instead, she walked to the center of the cave and sat down. Her massive body filled the space like a mountain of silver. Then, to Daniel's shock, she reached to a corner and pulled something out. Not meat, not bones, but a glowing fruit, round and red like fire. She held it out toward him. Daniel stared, confused. Why would a carnivore offer him food? Was this a trick? A way to fatten him up before the real feast? His stomach growled in betrayal. He hadn't eaten since the crash, and the smell of the fruit was sharp and sweet. The giantess waited, her eyes fixed on him, slowly. With trembling hands, Daniel reached out and took the fruit. He bit into it, the juice running down his chin. It was unlike anything he had tasted. Sweet but also burning like spice. Warmth spread through his body, his pain dulling for the first time since the crash. The giantess hummed softly, almost like approval. Her golden eyes softened for a brief moment, then hardened again. Daniel's mind spun with questions. Why feed him? Why protect him? Why not simply end him? She must be hungry, he thought. She must want something else, something deeper than food. As he finished the fruit, Daniel's gaze fell again on the bones scattered around. Some looked human, or at least close. His chest tightened with dread. Perhaps others had been here before him. Perhaps they had not been as lucky. The giantess followed his gaze, her face unreadable. She tapped one claw against the stone, then made a sound low, melodic, almost like a word. Daniel shivered. Was she telling him that those bones were prey, or warning him that he could join them? His body tensed, ready to run, but she moved first. Her massive hand stretched out and pushed him gently back down. Not cruel, not crushing, but firm. Her eyes burned brighter, the hunger inside them clear. But it was not hunger for flesh. It was hunger for something else, something he could not yet name. Daniel felt trapped between fear and fascination. Every instinct told him to escape, but every glance of her golden eyes held him in place. She leaned closer, her warm breath brushing against his face. He expected the sharp teeth to close around him, but again, they didn't. Instead, she made that humming sound once more, deeper now, vibrating through the stone walls. It was not the sound of a predator. It was the sound of longing. Daniel realized with a chill that the giantess had no simple hunger. Yes, she was carnivorous. Yes, she could kill. But with him, it was different. She wanted something beyond food. Something that made her guard him, feed him, and study him. And that unknown desire scared him more than death itself. He sat in the glow of the crystals, his heart racing. The giantess's stare never left him. The silence pressed down heavy, broken only by the sound of his own breathing. Finally, he whispered to himself, "She doesn't want to eat me." But what does she want? The question hung in the air, unanswered, and the giantess's golden eyes glimmered with secrets that only deepened the mystery. Asterisk. The cave was silent except for the faint dripping of water from the ceiling. Daniel sat near the glowing crystals, his body tense, his hands shaking from both fear and hunger. The giantess still watched him, her golden eyes glowing in the dim light. Her stare was heavy, unbroken, as if she could see every thought in his head. He had eaten the fruit she gave him, but his fear had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. She could kill him at any moment, yet she chose not to. Why? The question burned inside him like fire. The giantess shifted, her massive body scraping against the stone. She leaned down, close enough that Daniel could see the tiny cracks in her silver skin. Then she lifted one enormous finger and pointed at him. Her claw tapped the ground near his feet. She drew a shape in the dirt, slow and careful. It was crude. But Daniel gasped. It was the shape of a human. His heart skipped. She knew about his kind. This was no accident. She had seen humans before. The giantess then pointed at herself, her glowing eyes never leaving his. With her claw she drew another figure, larger, wider, unmistakably her own kind. Two shapes side by side. Then she tapped the space between them. Daniel stared, confused. What was she trying to say? He hesitated, then slowly reached out his finger with shaking hands. He drew a small line connecting the two shapes. Her golden eyes flickered, her head tilting slightly as though she understood. She made a low humming sound, softer this time. The sound made his chest vibrate, almost calming him for a brief moment. Daniel thought, she's trying to talk, not with words, but with gestures. The thought terrified and fascinated him at the same time. The giantess drew again, faster this time, a group of smaller human figures, surrounded by larger giant figures. Her claw circled them. Then she looked straight at Daniel. His throat went dry. It was clear his kind had been here before, and not just once. Were the bones scattered in the cave proof of this? Were they captives, sacrifices, something worse? Daniel's stomach turned at the thought. The giantess leaned closer, her breath warm, her stare endless. Then she tapped the drawing again, harder. The ground trembling under her claw. Daniel flinched, backing away. His mind screamed, "What does she want from me?" His fear boiled over, and he snapped. "No!" he shouted, voice breaking. He shook his head violently, his hands raised in refusal. The giantess froze, her glowing eyes narrowing. She tilted her head like a puzzled predator. Then, to Daniel's shock, she copied him. Slowly, she shook her head too. The same gesture. His heart pounded. She was learning. For the first time, Daniel felt a crack in the wall of fear. She wasn't only a beast, she was intelligent, and intelligence meant reason. But it also meant purpose. What purpose could a giantess have for a fragile human like him? The silence grew heavy again. The giantess reached for another fruit. Placing it near him without a word, Daniel hesitated, then took it, biting into it carefully as he ate. He noticed her watching every move, not with hunger, but with strange fascination. It was like she was studying him, memorizing him. Her stare had changed. It was no longer only the stare of a predator. It was the stare of someone trying to bridge a gap. After a long moment, she began to hum again. This time the sound rose and fell like a melody. Daniel felt it deep in his chest. It almost sounded like speech, like words too big for his ears to understand. He pressed his hands over his ears. but the sound still vibrated inside his skull. When it stopped, the silence felt colder. The giantess lowered her head, her golden eyes watching him carefully. As if waiting for him to answer, Daniel's hands trembled. He crouched and drew a star in the dirt, pointing up toward the sky. Then he touched his chest. He pointed upward again. The giantess leaned close, her golden eyes widening slightly. Her claw traced the same star shape next to his. Then she tapped her own chest. Daniel's breath caught. For the first time, he felt a connection. They came from different worlds, but they both knew the stars. For a brief heartbeat, the fear faded, replaced by awe. Yet deep inside, Daniel could not forget the bones scattered around. If she knew about humans, if she had seen them before, then what had happened to them? Her eyes were too sharp, her gestures too precise. This was not her first time communicating with a human. Daniel's thoughts darkened. The fruit, the protection, the strange attempts at communication. It was not kindness. It was not mercy. It was something else. Something she wanted. Something she needed. The giantess's golden eyes glowed brighter, as if answering his thoughts without words. Her claw tapped the drawing again, harder this time, circling the human figure she had made. Her stare locked on him, unblinking. Daniel shivered. She was telling him something clear, something undeniable. He was not the first human here, and he would not be the last. The cave felt colder now, even though the glowing crystals gave off a faint warmth. Daniel sat with his back against the wall, his eyes darting between the scattered bones and the giantess's golden stare. The drawings on the dirt floor still burned in his mind. Humans standing beside her kind, trapped in circles, surrounded. He swallowed hard, the bitter taste of fear rising in his throat. The giantess shifted, her massive frame blocking the cave entrance for a moment. Daniel's heart raced. She was no longer just a predator in his eyes. She was something worse, something with a history tied to his kind. Her gestures, her drawings, her strange sounds, they all told the same story. This had happened before. Daniel's breathing grew shallow. He glanced at the bones scattered across the ground. Some were massive, belonging to creatures he could not name, but others were smaller, more familiar. His stomach turned. The curve of the skulls, the shape of the arms, they looked human, or at least close enough to make him shiver. The giantess noticed where his eyes had gone. She hummed low, the sound echoing in the cave walls. It was not a sound of anger, not a roar of warning. It was softer, but filled with weight. Daniel felt his skin crawl. It was as if she was saying, "Yes, you see it. Yes, you understand." He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his injured leg. "You've done this before," he whispered under his breath. His voice cracked, his throat dry. "You've kept humans here." Of course she could not understand his words, but his fear was plain, and she read it in his eyes. The giantess leaned closer, her glowing gaze sharp, unblinking. Her claw tapped the ground again, right on the human figure she had drawn. Then she tapped her own chest. Daniel shook his head furiously, backing up until his shoulders hit the stone wall. "No," he gasped, his voice trembling. "I'm not one of them, I'm not." But she did not move away. Her stare grew heavier, pressing into him like a weight he could not escape. For the first time since meeting her, Daniel felt not just fear of death, but fear of purpose. She didn't want to eat him, she wanted to keep him. The silence thickened. The crystals glowed brighter, as though reacting to her presence. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized something. The bones scattered across the floor were not all signs of meals. Some were placed in patterns, arranged almost carefully. It was not only killing, it was ritual, and he was standing in the middle of it. The giantess finally moved back, sitting again, her head tilting as if she were waiting. Daniel's mind spun. What was she waiting for? For him to understand, for him to accept, or for him to give in? The thought made him sick. He pushed himself up and limped toward the cave mouth. But her hand came down with terrifying speed, not crushing, not violent, just blocking the path. Her golden eyes narrowed. her head lowering slowly until her face was level with his. She opened her mouth slightly, her sharp teeth gleaming in the crystal light. Daniel froze, every muscle in his body trembling. But she did not bite. Instead, she let out another low, vibrating hum. It rattled through his bones, and in that moment, Daniel understood something chilling. The giantess was not hungry for his flesh. She was hungry for his presence. She wanted something from him that went beyond survival, something her kind had wanted from humans long before him. Daniel stumbled back, his breath uneven, his mind filled with images of other humans, standing where he stood, looking into those same golden eyes. Some might have resisted, some might have given in. The bones on the ground told the story of those who had failed. Would he be next? The giantess reached for the dirt again, her claw carving new lines. This time she drew the figure of a human and a giantess side by side. Then she drew a circle around them. She tapped it once, twice, then lifted her head, her stare locked on him. The meaning was clear. She wanted him to be part of that circle. She wanted to bind him to her in some way he could not yet understand. Daniel's knees weakened, his body cold with dread. He whispered to himself, barely able to breathe, "This isn't survival. This is something else." He thought of the crash, of the moment he woke in her shadow. He had believed she would eat him. But now the truth was far worse. She didn't want him as food. She wanted him as something else. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. The giantess leaned back, her golden eyes unblinking. Daniel pressed himself against the cold stone wall, his heart pounding. He could not escape, and deep inside, he feared the truth more than death itself. Daniel sat against the cave wall, his chest rising and falling quickly. The giantess's drawings glowed faintly in the crystal light, her claw marks circling the image of a human and her kind together. She had shown him her truth, and it terrified him more than her teeth ever had. She did not want him as prey. She wanted him as something else, something he could not yet understand. The giantess moved slowly now, her massive body shifting with the grace of a predator that had no need to rush. Her golden eyes stayed on him, never blinking, never softening. Daniel hugged his knees, his injured leg throbbing, his mind racing with desperate questions. Why protect him from the swamp predators? Why feed him? Why show him drawings? If it wasn't hunger for flesh, then what hunger drove her? Her hand lowered toward him, palm open. Daniel flinched, pressing himself tighter to the stone. But she did not grab him. Instead, she rested her massive hand flat on the ground, her golden gaze steady. It was almost an invitation again. Daniel hesitated, his heart hammering. Was she asking for trust or claiming ownership? Slowly, trembling, he placed his small hand on the tip of her giant finger. The surface was smooth and warm, like living metal under skin. The giantess hummed, the sound low and deep, vibrating through the floor. Daniel pulled back quickly, his heart pounding. But she made no move to stop him. Her stare was not filled with hunger for his flesh. It was hunger for something else. Connection. Daniel's mind rebelled against the thought. She was a giantess, a carnivore, a predator, and yet she looked at him not as food, but as if she needed him. Why? The bones around him whispered terrible answers. Maybe others had been kept the same way. Maybe they had been forced into whatever circle she wanted. Some had survived, some had not. The giantess leaned back slightly, reaching for another piece of glowing fruit. She placed it near him, then made the same humming sound, softer. This time, Daniel hesitated, staring at the fruit. Every part of him screamed not to take it, but his stomach burned with hunger, and part of him knew if he refused, she might take it as rejection. Slowly, he picked it up and bit into it. The sweet, sharp taste filled his mouth, warmth spreading through him again. The giantess hummed once more, almost like approval. Her golden eyes softened just a little, but the intensity never left. Daniel wiped the juice from his chin, his hands shaking. "I don't understand you," he whispered, voice trembling. "I don't know what you want from me." She tilted her head at the sound. The way her ears twitched, the way her eyes narrowed, it felt like she could almost sense the meaning. Then she moved closer, lowering her face until her shadow swallowed him. Her warm breath washed over him, not smelling of blood, but of strange fruit and earth. Her mouth opened slightly, and he saw her sharp teeth again. Daniel froze, but once more, she did not bite. Instead, she touched her claw gently against his chest, right over his heart. His body went cold, his breath stuck in his throat. She pulled her claw back and tapped her own chest. Her golden eyes burned with intensity. Daniel's mind reeled. She was showing him she wanted more than food. She wanted his life, his spirit, maybe even his loyalty. The silence thickened. The crystals hummed faintly, glowing brighter as though feeding off the tension. Daniel's throat tightened. He realized with horror that the bones in this cave did not only belong to prey. Some might have belonged to humans who refused her. This was not a prison, not a nest. It was a place of choice, and he was standing at the edge of one. The giantess leaned back slightly, her hand resting on the ground again, palm open. Her golden eyes never wavered. Daniel stared at that massive hand, his body trembling. If he stepped onto it, he was giving in. If he refused, he did not know what would happen. Either way, the truth was clear. She was not going to eat him. She wanted something far stranger, far more dangerous. Daniel's voice cracked as he whispered to himself, "She doesn't want me as a meal. She wants me as something else." The thought chilled him. Her hunger was not for his flesh. It was for his presence, his choice, maybe even his submission. That was not the meal he feared. It was something worse. The silence dragged on. The giantess's golden eyes gleamed like fire, her open hand waiting. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized whatever decision he made next would change everything. The cave was silent, heavy with the weight of unspoken meaning. Daniel's chest rose and fell quickly. His eyes locked on the massive open palm before him. The giantess sat still, her golden stare never leaving him. Her hand rested like a bridge between them, waiting. It was not a trap, not in the way he once feared. It was an invitation. Daniel's throat was dry, his body shaking. If he stepped onto her hand, he would be accepting whatever she wanted. If he refused, he feared she might decide he was useless. The bones scattered across the cave floor whispered reminders of those who had made their choices before him. Some had been crushed, some had been kept. None had walked away free. He closed his eyes, his thoughts racing. She had protected him from the swamp predators. She had fed him, tended to him in her own strange way. But every action came with purpose. Predators did not waste energy without reason. She wanted something, and Daniel was the only one left to give it. When he opened his eyes, her golden gaze burned into his soul. She lifted her other claw and tapped again at the drawing in the dirt, the human figure beside the giantess. Circle binding them. She tapped it twice, then looked back at him. Her stare was fierce, almost desperate. This was not just survival, this was destiny, hers, and maybe his. Daniel's legs trembled as he took one step forward. The giantess did not move, did not blink. Her open hand waited, her claws resting on the stone like curved blades. He climbed slowly onto her palm. The surface was warm and alive. Trembling faintly with her pulse, her fingers curled slightly. Cradling him, she lifted him high, her golden eyes glowing brighter as though the cave itself recognized his choice. From this height, he could see the cave drawings spread across the walls. More humans, more giantesses, circles upon circles. This was no single story, it was history. Her kind had done this for generations. Humans had been part of their world long before him. The truth made his stomach twist. He was not the first, and he would not be the last. The giantess rose to her full height, towering like a living mountain. She carried him to the cave's mouth, the swamp stretching endlessly before them. But this time she did not turn back toward the dark forest. Instead, she walked in the opposite direction, her long strides shaking the earth. Daniel held onto her skin, his heart pounding. The air grew clearer, brighter. as though they were leaving the shadows of the swamp behind. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time bent under his fear and awe. At last, the trees opened, and Daniel's eyes widened. Before him stood a towering alien city carved into cliffs of stone. Glowing towers rose into the sky. Bridges stretched across deep valleys, and within them, massive figures moved. Other giantesses, their silver skin glowing, their golden eyes burning in the twilight. Daniel gasped, his chest tightening, and then he saw them. Humans, not many, but enough. Some were walking on the ground beside the giantesses, others sitting on their palms. Some looked fearful, some resigned, and some strangely content. The sight hit him like a storm. He was not alone. His fate was already written in theirs. The giantess carrying him let out a deep hum. The sound echoed across the cliffs, and other giantesses turned their heads, their golden eyes locked on Daniel. A ripple went through them, like recognition, like approval. Daniel's breath caught. He was not a prisoner, not exactly. He was a prize, a chosen one. But chosen for what? The giantess lowered her hand, placing him on her broad shoulder. From this height he could see more humans below. Some worked alongside their towering companions. Others simply lived in their shadows. It was not freedom. It was not death. It was something in between, a bond, a claim, a life tied to theirs. Daniel's mind spun. He thought back to the crash, to the first moment he saw her shadow. He had thought she would eat him, that her sharp teeth meant his end. But he was wrong. Her hunger was not for flesh. It was for connection, for dominance, for something far stranger. And now he was part of it. The giantess's golden eyes glowed as she carried him deeper into the alien city. Her hum rumbled in her chest, a sound that made the very stone vibrate. Daniel clung to her, his heart pounding. His fate was sealed, not eaten, not killed, but claimed. And in that moment, Daniel realized the terrifying truth. He had not escaped. He had only entered a new kind of captivity. His final thought before the city swallowed him was a whisper of fear and wonder. She didn't want to eat me. But what she does want may be far worse.